I am the owner of Necon Technologies. We are a manufacturer of copper-silver ionization systems based in Ireland. And I'm here to talk to you about copper-silver ionization and water disinfection within a healthcare setting in general. Sorry, how do I go back? So what is copper-silver ionization? It is the process of dosing copper and silver ions into water. It's a fairly simple technology. We take DC currents, we apply it to an anode and a cathode, and we generate ions from those metals. The metals themselves, the ions, are biocidally active, and it ensures the eradication of harmful pathogens. The levels of copper and silver that we use are completely non-toxic and safe, and it's the only disinfection modality that's been proven in long-term studies to control microbial populations in the long term. We have installations in now over 350 hospitals worldwide. A little bit about water, because I think it's important that we understand water before we talk about disinfecting it. So water, firstly, is a universal solvent, so it will dissolve most anything if you give it enough time. In its pure form, it's slightly acidic. Pure water has a pH of about 5.5. That adds to its corrosivity, and it is corrosive. It is also essential for life, and it is potentially toxic. It is finally an ideal reservoir for microorganisms. It's important to understand water because without water, our hospitals can't function. But water in itself poses an inherent risk. I've been in many facilities down through the years in biomedical and pharmaceutical companies, and when you go to their clean rooms, the one thing you'll notice is they don't have sinks, they don't have taps, and they don't have water. Because water is considered too high a contamination risk in those areas. Unfortunately, we don't have that luxury in healthcare facilities because we need to wash and we need to deal with it. So how does copper and silver work? Well, both metals have been known for millennia to be antimicrobial. If you trace it back in history, in ancient Rome, silver was used to keep water sterile. Even today, in parts of India and rural Africa, they use copper vessels and they store the water overnight to ensure purity. The mechanisms we're beginning to understand more and more about, but it's basically all about electron movement. And what we do is we disrupt the cell wall surface. Both metals will also inhibit and denature DNA and RNA, and it is a multifaceted, multi-mode method of disinfection, which is important when it comes to development of resistance. Resistance to copper has been known, resistance to silver has been known, but there's been no known case of resistance to copper and silver being generated by any microorganism. So this is just a comparison of our water purification methods. So we can thermally disinfect, we can use chlorines, we can use other halogens. All of them suffer from disadvantages. Firstly, many are sentinel or gatekeeper technologies. So what I mean by that is at the point in which they're introduced, they will disinfect. They will have no long-term residual effect. Copper and silver lasts. The residual effect of copper and silver isn't affected by temperature, and the residual effect of copper and silver isn't affected by length or complexity of the network. Most of the halogens, chlorine, bromine, and iodine, being gases, will eventually gas off. Copper and silver lasts and keeps going. What are the waterborne pathogens that we're dealing with? Everybody talks about Legionella, but there's a lot more. We have other bacteria, we have fungi, we have mycobacteria, and we have amoebic organisms. All of those are present in the water and all have to be considered in terms of water disinfection. Recent guidelines that have been introduced in many countries are now expanding beyond Legionella. They're including Pseudomonas, other Pseudomonas species such as Pseudomonas aeruginosa, we have Burkholdia. Non-tuberculosis mycobacteria are becoming more and more prevalent. So where does this contamination come from? And I think this is, and I'm conscious that we have a coffee break coming up, so I'm going to try and keep this brief, but I think this is where we need to have a firm understanding of where the problem comes from. It's biofilm. We have clean water systems distributing water into our hospitals and our healthcare facilities. So you would imagine that the problem isn't at root. It isn't within the treatment systems that bring the water in. It's down to the complexity of the network that we have ourselves. So we promote an environment where the bacteria can thrive, where they can lock on to a section of pipe, start to form polysaccharides, develop their biofilm and spread. And this doesn't only happen within piping distribution networks. I'm in a room of medical professionals, so we're all familiar with biofilm developments within wound sites, within urinary catheters, throughout the human body. And the one that I like to highlight the most is dental plaque. So we brush our teeth twice a day. We have chlorine in our water. In Ireland and the UK, we have fluoride in our water. We have fluoride in our toothpaste. We have alcohol in our mouthwash. But the dentist will tell you to brush your teeth twice a day. And why is that? Is because physical removal is the only known method to get rid of that biofilm deposit, apart from copper silver. The other thing we need to understand about the biofilm is how quickly it can develop. We brush our teeth twice a day. Most dentists will tell you if you can brush 3 times, it's even better. So biofilms will develop, and we're beginning to understand more about them, that they will develop as quickly as 2 hours and become recalcitrant within 2 hours. There's a lot of study going on currently on dry biofilms within surfaces in hospitals where you would consider a surface is ambient, but biofilm development can occur very quickly on dry surfaces. We have ambient moisture in the air, and that's all they need. So control of the biofilm is key. So how does copper silver do that? Polysaccharides were developed by the bacteria, being the oldest form of ecosystem on the planet, bacteria being the first life forms. They were designed as a form of environmental protection primarily, but secondarily they were devised as an ecosystem. So the polysaccharides that they secrete sequester the nutrients and the minerals that the organisms need to survive. They also sequester copper and silver. The way the copper and silver works is the sequestering of that by the biofilm kind of poisons the well and creates a toxic environment to the microorganisms within it. It doesn't happen quickly, but it does happen. So over time, the biofilm itself becomes a toxic environment, the bacteria die, and the biofilm depletes and sheds off. So biofilm is also ubiquitous. I think the only examples that I've ever come across where they've managed to maintain a biofilm-free environment is probably in renal dialysis. Sometimes in clinical services and clinical disinfection, but renal dialysis, extraordinary measures are taken to ensure that you don't have any bacterial contamination. Every other piping network will suffer from some form of biofilm deposit. The amount will depend on varying factors, the bacterial load of the incoming supply, the temperature of the piping network itself, the pipe material, the system age, the system complexity, the incoming water quality, what kind of organics are coming in, what kind of nutrients are being supplied to the bacteria, and more. It's a very complex issue, and it's one that's very difficult to solve. Is chlorine enough? bacterial survival fluorine chlorination has been observed. Resistance to chlorine is highly unlikely, but like all biocides, dose and bioload are important. So chlorine is not going to cure all of the problems. The issue, again, comes back down to biofilm, because chlorine will scald the top of the biofilm surface, but it will not penetrate the substrate. So we can't rely on treated water to keep our networks clean. Domestic water isn't sterile incoming into the building, and the plumbing systems allow for further bacterial growth and biofilm proliferation. Another thing that we need to be conscious of is temperature. So it's recommended that we reduce water temperature if at all possible to limit Legionella growth and biofilm development, but Legionella will still survive at low temperatures. They will survive in ice machines and have been found in ice machines, and thermophilic species have been found in the geysers in Yellowstone Park. So we need to be conscious that temperature is not enough. The piping materials come into play. Stainless steel is one of my pet hates. I make my systems and my flow cells from stainless steel, but I abhor the use of it as a piping material because it is actually probably the best designed material for biofilm formation that you can get. If you look at it under a microscope, it's full of fissures and crevices to allow a foothold for the bacteria to form. Some of the newer piping materials, like the Teflon lined pipes, are better because they're smooth. They don't allow a bacterial foothold, but they have their own issues in that they shed off and leave leaching contaminants within the water. Copper is better, but copper is limited in terms of its viability because it will eventually oxidize, and its effectiveness at retarding bacterial growth over time will deplete. Fluid flow, fluid dynamics, and shear rates, laminar flow will all come into play in where biofilm forms. It's impossible to have a fluid flow without some kind of turbulence within a complex network. Once you get turbulence, you will get areas within that where the shear forces are lower, and bacteria will get a chance to develop a biofilm. Other material factors include old faucets and taps, full of crevices and areas where, again, biofilm can form. Do we have any additional aids that we can use in helping our disinfectants? We can do sampling. Sometimes that's valuable, but the thing about a sample is it's a snapshot in time. It tells you that there were bacteria present or not at the time you took the sample, but it doesn't mean that if you come back in 5 minutes that there won't be. Residual biocide monitoring. Yeah, we can monitor residual biocide, but is that a direct indicator of bacterial quality? I have seen biofilm probes used. Again, they assist, but they only tell you about the biofilm in the location where they're installed. Temperature monitoring definitely helps. The Q10 rule in science tells us that in any given chemical reaction, the efficacy and speed of that reaction is going to increase by a multiple factor with every 10 degrees rise in temperature. So every biocide that you introduce into your network is going to be assisted by higher temperatures. So higher temperatures and temperature monitoring I see as key. Copper and silver and biofilm. So again, back down to our causative factor. The copper and silver is sequestered by the polysaccharides. The biofilm becomes a toxic environment. Copper also induces a pH change. Copper is slightly alkaline. Biofilms tend towards the acidic scale. The other thing that we're just beginning to understand is how copper interacts with quorum sensing. So quorum sensing allows bacteria to communicate within the biofilm matrix itself. And copper is highly affiliated to the oligopeptides that they use to communicate. So it breaks down form of communication and the channels of communication within the biofilm network. So it all assists in over time depleting the biofilm. Does it work? These are just a list of guidelines and sample studies which have proven that it does. These are some of the hospitals who have used it in the past to their benefit. Now, is it a panacea? No. Will it always work? No. It has drawbacks and it has disadvantages. It requires maintenance. In areas of hard water, the electrodes do tend to get scaled. In hard water areas, we recommend that the water is treated and softened, or an increased maintenance routine is put in place. You need to ensure that flushing takes place, because no biocide will work unless the biocide gets to the root cause. So flushing in all cases in any disinfectant use is important until you get the problem eradicated and your levels under control. So how does it work? So we have a picture here of 2 flow cells in a control unit. The way our system operates, we measure the incoming flow rate. We then vary the current applied to our electrodes and increase or decrease that so we have a proportional dosing. Is it safe? That's a question I often get asked. In terms of copper, copper is an essential micronutrient, and we dose at an average of 0.4 milligrams per liter of copper. In foodstuffs, we have far higher concentrations. Oats, for example, has close to 9 milligrams per kilo. So copper is not an issue. How does it work? This is just a schematic of how we install. It's important that for maintenance we install on a bypass so we can service the system without interrupting the mains hospital supply. So again, why? It's a rather unique disinfection modality. It's safe and controlled. It has a long-term full residual activity. It's the only technology that has been proven in long-term studies to deal with biofilm. It is cost-effective. It avoids the need for chemical storage or handling. It's easy to monitor and service. This is a real-world example. This is a swimming pool, and I like to use a swimming pool because people sometimes say, well, it's not suitable because it's used in swimming pools. Well, swimming pools are probably one of the most difficult water systems to treat because you have a perfect ambient temperature for bacterial development and growth. You have the constant addition of both nutrients and additional bacteria, and they just have the potential to be a bacteria soup. We did a study in the university in Galway many years back where we took a bath of pure water, and we took one of the students and we asked them to just sit in the bath for 5 minutes, and then we analyzed the bacterial shed off him, and we got up onto log 25 from pure water. We got log 25. So the amount of bacteria that are shed just off from bathing are huge. So if you can control the bacterial quality of water using copper silver ionization in a swimming pool, I think you can control it anywhere. This swimming pool I chose an example because they actually take their source water from a well, and that's it. And I'll be happy to field questions afterwards. I hope you found this valuable. Thank you.